Something that I think a lot of people that are new to Yu-Gi-Oh fail to understand is the difference between a useful effect and a powerful effect. Allow me to explain the difference. A powerful effect is an effect that gives the user a noticeable advantage, while a useful effect is one that either increases consistency or enables other hard to use but powerful effects. Examples of powerful effects include the effect of Pot of Greed, which allows you to draw 2 cards, Forceful Sentry, which allows you to look at your opponent's hand and take a card from it, and Raigeki, which allows you to destroy all monsters your opponent controls. A card like Pot of Greed offers card advantage, which allows you to take 1 card from your hand and convert it into 2 cards. Card advantage is extremely important in Yu-Gi-Oh as it doesn't have any sort of mana system like Pokemon or Magic. Any card in your hand can be activated at any point during the duel. As a result, card advantage is one of the most important things to take into account, even when talking about older formats of Yu-Gi-Oh! Forceful Sentry is a powerful effect, however, in spite of the fact that it's only neutral in card advantage. It takes 1 card from your hand and converts it into 1 card lost from your opponent's hand. However, the information that you get from being able to look at your opponent's hand is really where the power comes into play for this card. A card like Raigeki allows you to essentially go upwards of +5 in the exchange because it allows you to take 1 card from your hand and convert it into up to 6 if their field is completely full, including the extra monster zone. Cards like Pot of Greed, Forceful Sentry, and Raigeki are also useful because they're easy to activate. Some examples of cards that are strictly useful include Reinforcement of the Army, Foolish Burial, Destiny Hero Diamond Dude, and Orchestrated Babel. Reinforcement of the Army merely offers consistency as it acts as an extra copy of any level 4 or lower warrior that you might run in your deck. This allows for the deck to functionally offer more copies of any given warrior monster, and it allows for a more toolboxy type of gameplay, where if you run more than one level 4 or lower warrior, a Reinforcement of the Army can be whichever one you need in that given scenario. Foolish Burial offers a lot of utility because of the fact that it can convert into any monster in the graveyard. A lot of monsters want to be in the graveyard, so an effect that puts them there can allow for powerful effects to trigger. An effect like Destiny Hero Diamond Dude doesn't seem very powerful on the surface as it only copies the effect of a normal spell, but if that normal spell is a powerful one like Pot of Greed or Raigeki, then it can become extremely powerful. But that powerfulness is only doable because of the interaction between it and powerful normal spells. It also functions as being extremely useful because it ignores certain costs. A card that requires a lot of cost to be paid in order for a powerful effect to happen, like, say, Pot of Extravagance, which requires you to banish 6 random cards from your extra deck face down, that effect can be activated without needing to pay the cost if it is milled off the effect of Diamond Dude. Orchestrated Babel, on the other hand, is an effect that merely allows other effects to become usable at quick speed. And in an archetype like Orcust, where all of the effects can then cause more monsters to enter positions where their effects can be activated, you can essentially play on your opponent's turn, all thanks to Orchestrated Babel. Now, not all cards that are powerful are useful. Some cards that are powerful but useless include Ancient Leaf, Smoke Grenade of the Thief, and Ojama Delta Hurricane. Now, it may seem confusing that I list a ban card among cards that are powerful but useless, but a card's uselessness can be offset by a card that is useful. Before we get to that, however, I should mention that cards like Ancient Leaf and Ojama Delta Hurricane are powerful yet useless because of either their steep or hard to achieve cost, or their hard to achieve activation requirements. A card like Ancient Leaf requires you to pay more life points than you start with in any given game, meaning that you have to draw it along with a card that increases your life points above the threshold required to activate Ancient Leaf. And a card like Ojama Delta Hurricane requires you to control 3 extremely weak vanilla monsters on your side of the field in order for it to be activated. However, in a deck dedicated to summoning all 3 Ojamas, Ojama Delta Hurricane can become a card that's powerfulness becomes extremely useful in scenarios where cards that make it easy to summon all three are easy to get to. The other side of the coin can also exist, cards that are useful but not very powerful. A card like Medallion of the Ice Barrier, while useful in an Ice Barrier deck, is not very powerful because none of the Ice Barrier cards are worth searching. The same goes for a card like Ogdoadic Water Lily. It can either be a send from deck of a reptile monster or a search for a reptile monster, and because of the fact that Konami has yet to print a reptile archetype worth playing, it makes it an extremely not powerful card in the face of its usefulness. Now, in a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! With 10,000 plus cards, sometimes cards that are powerful but not very useful find themselves being paired up with cards that are useful but not very powerful. Let's bring back the example of Smoke Grenade of the Thief. Now, obviously, Smoke Grenade of the Thief is banned, which means it found a way to become useful. That way was through the effect of a card called Infernoble Knight Emperor Charles. Now, Charles is not the only monster that enabled this to happen. Isolde, Two Tails of the Noble Knight, can be used to send Smoke Grenade of the Thief to the graveyard in order to meet the cost of its activation to summon a monster from deck. And Infernoble Knight Charles can be summoned over the course of a combo which included summoning Isolde, which means that when Charles is summoned, Smoke Grenade of the Thief is inevitably in the graveyard, and during the end phase, it has the effect to equip the grenade and then pop a card on the field by card effect. The problem Smoke Grenade of the Thief has is that its activation requirement is hard to meet. Because it requires being destroyed by card effect, it being destroyed by game mechanics, i.e. the card it's equipped to leaving the field and it being destroyed, do not trigger its effect. And it's difficult to get into a situation where it's equipped to a monster and also able to be destroyed in a way that isn't extremely cumbersome. The Infernoble Knights created a shell where Smoke Grenade of the Thief could be used as a garnet in order to be sent off of Isolde's effect, and it could also be used as part of Emperor Charles's end phase effect in order to Forceful Sentry your opponent. Now, sometimes useful cards can take the shape of cards that go neutral in card advantage but allow you to dig deeper into your deck. The more a card allows you to dig into your deck, the closer it gets to becoming powerful. A card like Upstart Goblin allows you to take one card from your hand and convert it into a random draw from your deck. Other cards exist like Trade-In, which allow you to draw two cards but then discard a card from your hand that meets certain conditions. The conditions for Trade-In are that the monster you're discarding be level 8. This takes two cards from your hand and converts it into two cards from the top of your deck. In scenarios where the card that you're discarding wants to be in the graveyard and has an effect which allows you to gain card advantage off of it, a card like Trade-In can go from being neutral in card advantage to a +1. In scenarios where that card sent converts into multiple cards over the course of a combo, Trade-In can go from being a +1 to a +infinity. One such very specific example is that of Allure of Darkness. Allure of Darkness allows you to draw two cards and then banish a dark from your hand. If you do not banish a dark, then you send your entire hand to the graveyard. In decks that play exclusively dark monsters, this card is basically Pot of Greed, especially in scenarios where cards want to be banished. One of the most powerful examples is when Allure of Darkness saw heavy play in Thunder Dragon. A lot of the Thunder Dragons wanted to be banished, and quite a few of them were dark. The most powerful interaction was when you would Allure of Darkness and either already have in your hand or draw into Thunder Dragon Roar. When Thunder Dragon Roar is banished, it allows you to summon a Thunder Dragon monster from your deck. This meant that when you Allure of Darkness, it was a +1, and because of the fact that Thunder Dragon's banish effect also triggered when a monster was sent from the field to the graveyard, that monster that was summoned off of Thunder Dragon Roar also got its effect once it was sent to the graveyard, usually either being used as material for a Link monster or as material for Thunder Dragon Colossus, which is now banned. You also start to get into murky scenarios because the idea of a card being only useful if it goes neutral in card advantage starts to become a little reductive, because if you look at a card like Graceful Charity, it technically goes neutral in card advantage, but it allows you to dig 3 cards deeper into your deck, and The downside of having to discard 2 cards is a discard, which means cards that trigger specifically off of being discarded are allowed to activate. With the advent of newer archetypes, like Dangers, or going back a little further, but still after the banning of Graceful Charity, looking at an archetype like Dark World or Fabled, you begin to see why a card like Graceful Charity, even though it goes net neutral in card advantage, is still considered extremely powerful. But that ability to discard 2 means that it is not only powerful in its own right and useful, as it is easy to activate, but it's also a useful tool for activating other effects. Many cards have powerful effects that are hard to activate, and other cards have useful effects that don't have good targets for them. This is not necessarily a dichotomy, it is merely an observation of 2 categories that are not mutually exclusive. A card may be extremely powerful and see 0 play, and a card may seem extremely unpowerful at first but see tons of play. When you judge a card, you need to consider, is this card powerful? And then you need to consider how easy is it to activate, and also you need to consider how consistent is it for me to get this effect off. A card like Raigeki being at 1 means that its usefulness is extremely hampered, not in the sense that it's hard to activate, but in the sense that you're not going to see it very often. A card like Raigeki destroys, and it doesn't have any sort of protection against negation. A card like Dark Ruler No More is extremely powerful and extremely useful, but it also has built-in conditions that make it difficult for your opponent to interact with it. That being said, sometimes the cost of a card can also make it extremely difficult to consider as an inclusion in your deck. A card like Pot of Extravagance, while it does offer 2 draws off the top of your deck, also requires banishing 6 random cards face down from your extra deck, and in decks that require all of their extra deck, or decks that require very specific one-ofs that may be at 1, or can't be played at multiples because of too few slots in the extra deck, a card like Pot of Extravagance is more of a liability than it is a power card. In a deck that plays a bunch of 3-ofs in its extra deck or doesn't care about the extra deck, Pot of Extravagance is an extremely powerful include, but you have to weigh its powerfulness next to its usefulness, because a card's usefulness also has to take into consideration the type of deck it's being played in. A card like Orchestrated Babel, while useful in an Orcus deck, would not be useful in any other type of deck. A card like Reinforcement of the Army is extremely useful, but if you don't play any targets for it, or if the targets you play for it aren't very powerful, then its usefulness is extremely mitigated. Now, with a card game that is constantly seeing new cards being added almost monthly, and those cards needing to be more powerful than the last group of cards in order to justify people to buy new product, you're always going to see waves of support bring old cards back into the light. A card like Thunder Dragon, the vanilla Thunder Dragon, that allows you to discard itself and add 2 copies of itself from your deck, seemed like a very powerful effect on the surface because it was inherently a +1, but those Thunder Dragons in hand had no real value outside of being used as discard fodder. It was an extremely powerful effect in old Yu-Gi-Oh!, but saw 0 play in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! That all changed when an entire archetype was built around the card, and suddenly activating Thunder Dragon in hand meant that you suddenly had part of the summoning condition met for Thunder Dragon Colossus, on top of the fact that those 2 Thunder Dragons in hand could be used as fusion material for a card like Titan. Sometimes a card's usefulness doesn't become apparent until well after its time, and sometimes a card's powerfulness does become apparent until other cards get printed in order for it to become powerful. A card like Field Barrier saw 0 play until Mystic Mind became a thing. Suddenly, people who were playing Mystic Mind Burn were using it as a means to protect their Mystic Mind. You never know when a card's going to become powerful, and you never know when a card that once thought of as useless will become useful. It's important to keep track of all the cards in the card pool. I know that the average player can't keep track of these things, but there's always a group of dedicated people who are experimenting and trying out new things. If you like a card and you think that it's powerful or useful, but you don't see anyone playing it, give it a try. Go to a tournament, play a deck that includes that card, and you might just find that the card was far more powerful or far more useful than anyone else had anticipated. Long before Jeff Leonard was tearing up the PPG tour with Mindburn, there was a guy at my locals who played an absolutely garbage pile of cards that he called Mystic Mind Burn, but one of the cards that he was playing in his deck was Field Barrier in order to protect his Mystic Mine. He was only playing one copy of it because he could only get his hands on one copy. But it's still incredible to me to think that somebody who so many other people at the locals saw as someone who was extremely casual and didn't know a powerful card when it bit him in the nose was playing a card that would eventually go on to win multiple tournaments. The important thing to keep in mind here is that you should never judge a book by its cover. Just because a card seems useless or seems not very powerful doesn't mean that someone won't find a use or a power for it later on. What cards do you think don't get enough credit? Is there a card that you play that you think other people should be playing? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. I'll see you in the next video.